Have you ever paused and thought about how much of your suffering comes from your obsession with control? I'm not just talking about trying to manage external things, your work, your bills, your daily routine, but that internal pressure to have everything figured out. To know exactly who you are, what you want, and what the future holds. Society has taught us that we must seek certainty in everything. We're conditioned to believe that life should fit into a neat, predictable equation. But the harsh truth, one that few of us are willing to face, is that this obsession with certainty keeps us from finding the one thing we truly desire: peace. Maybe you're tired. Tired of trying to control the uncontrollable? Tired of making perfect plans that crumble at the slightest touch of chance? Perhaps you're caught in a constant state of anxiety where every uncertainty feels like a threat, where the unknown is something to be feared and defeated. But what if the problem isn't the uncertainty itself? What if the real poison is your refusal to accept it? Michel de Montaigne, the 16th century French philosopher, understood this long before modern psychology. While the world around him searched for dogmas, absolute truths, and rigid systems, he did something rare. He turned inward. Montaigne took the time to observe his own mind, to question his fears, his contradictions, and to write about all of it with brutal honesty. He didn't write as someone with all the answers, but as someone who learned how to live better with the questions. This is exactly what you need now. No more chasing certainties, but a new relationship with what you cannot control. In this video, I want to show you a different path, a lighter, braver way to face life. I want to share Montaigne's wisdom with you because when you stop resisting the unknown, something begins to change. Anxiety loses its grip, pressures fade away, and for the first time in a long while, life feels simpler. But here's the catch. This simplicity doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't come from changing the world around you. It comes from an internal revolution. It begins the moment you decide to let go, to release the illusion of control, and to walk with me, not toward answers, but toward a new way of being in the world. Are you ready for this? Because this journey, unlike anything you've been taught, starts with a single phrase. I don't know, and that's okay. Montaigne wasn't your average philosopher. He didn't ascend to pulpit after pulpit, create complex systems, or force the world into rational formulas. He wrote from within his own skin. Sitting in his library, surrounded by books and silence, Montaigne chose to investigate the most unstable and mysterious object that exists: himself. His writings weren't treatises, they were mirrors. He didn't write to convince you of anything. He wrote to invite you to think, to doubt, to question, to look within yourself, not with fear, but despite it. Unlike other thinkers who sought universal truths, Montaigne embraced the opposite. He didn't know, and the more he lived, the more he realized that knowing little about the world and even less about himself was not a flaw. It was a rare wisdom. He constantly asked, "What do I know?" Not as a provocation, but as a starting point. For Montaigne, admitting ignorance wasn't a failure, it was liberation. It was about stopping the pretense, dropping the masks, lifting the burden of always having to be right, complete, and impenetrable. In today's world, this kind of humility is rare. We live in a time when you must have an opinion about everything, take a stance on every issue, hold sharp certainties like blades. But Montaigne offers us something different, the chance to be human before we're ideological. He believed that our fragility, our doubts, our contradictions aren't weaknesses to be corrected. They are essential parts of what makes us truly alive. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what you need to hear right now. You no longer need to uphold false certainties to be worthy. You don't need to know everything to move forward. It's okay to be incomplete. Montaigne allowed himself to change his mind. He contradicted himself. He admitted that what he thought yesterday might not hold true today. He understood that the human mind is naturally fluid. It molds, adapts, and transforms, and instead of fighting it, he embraced it with kindness, irony, and even awe. He knew that living isn't about dominating the world with solid, unchanging ideas. It's about navigating it with an open mind and an attentive heart. Montaigne's wisdom is needed now more than ever. In a time when everyone shouts their opinions, Montaigne whispers. In a world full of hard certainties, he teaches us the lightness of doubt. If you feel lost, crushed by the pressure of being someone stable, defined, unchangeable, maybe what you're missing isn't direction. It's freedom. The freedom to change, to not know, to simply be. But Montaigne doesn't just invite us to doubt, he warns us of the cost of fleeing from it. Because the more we try to control life, the more suffering we create. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. The silent suffering that arises from our desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable. You try to control everything, don't you? Tomorrow, other people's reactions, your career, your body, your feelings, even the things that don't depend on you. And the more you try to grip life tightly, the more it slips away from you. It's like trying to hold water with your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it flows through your fingers. Have you noticed how much this costs you? This obsession with control isn't just exhausting, it's toxic. It turns you into a prisoner of unrealistic expectations. a constant inspector of every possible thing that could go wrong. And this is where anxiety creeps in. Anxiety at its core is the fear of the unpredictable. It's the desperate search for guarantees in a world that offers none. Most people live in this constant state of alertness, trying to anticipate every curve in the road, as if predicting the future could somehow prevent the accidents of the soul. But Montaigne knew something that modern psychology only confirmed centuries later. Living to predict the future is living in a state of war with reality. Human suffering doesn't always come from what happens to us. More often than not, it comes from our futile struggle against what happens. It's the desire for life to be different from what it is. It's the denial of the natural flow of things. Montaigne wrote about this with astonishing clarity. He accepted his pains, his losses, his uncertainties, not as something to eliminate, but as an essential part of existence. And by doing so, he freed himself from the burden of constantly resisting everything. Have you ever noticed how the most controlling people are also the most tense? The most exhausted? The most inflexible? They don't relax because they believe that if they're not always in control, something bad will happen. But this belief doesn't protect them, it imprisons them. Montaigne, on the other hand, proposed a conscious surrender, not a cowardly resignation, but a courageous acceptance that the world isn't your slave, and that your mind needs to learn to flow with it, not dominate it. And here lies the cruel irony. The more you try to control, the more frustrated you become. And the more frustrated you are, the more you believe that control is the only solution. It's a vicious cycle that keeps swallowing you whole. And in the end, what do you gain? A tense body, an exhausted mind, a soul without peace. Montaigne shows us another way. Living well is not about controlling everything, it's about knowing how to coexist with what cannot be controlled. But how do you do that in practice? How do you learn to live with the unpredictable without losing yourself in it? The answer lies in Montaigne's own attitude toward life. The constant practice of self-reflection, not as a cold analysis of oneself, but as a ritual of deep inner listening. While the world around him cried out for certainties, Montaigne withdrew into silence to observe what was inside him. And what he found wasn't immediate clarity, it was chaos, contradictions, fears, confused desires, inexplicable impulses, all the things that most people prefer to hide or ignore. But Montaigne didn't shy away from them. He confronted them head-on, but not as one who judges. He observed as one who listens. Montaigne's great genius wasn't in creating theories about the human mind. It was in having the courage to become a living experiment of the human condition. He turned himself into a field of study, and his writing became a mirror. In his essays, he didn't write as someone who teaches, but as someone who shares a process. He thought out loud and invited the reader to do the same. He didn't want to shape minds. He wanted to free them. By narrating his own doubts, his most intimate impulses, his changes of opinion, and even his moments of weakness, Montaigne showed us something revolutionary. You don't need to be right all the time. You just need to be present with yourself. This practice of constant self-observation, without filter and without mask, is one of the deepest forms of self-knowledge that exists. But be careful. Observing yourself isn't about torturing yourself with criticism. It's about learning to look inward with honesty and compassion. It's about recognizing when you're trying to deceive yourself, when you're pretending to know what you don't know, when you're forcing yourself to maintain an image that no longer represents you. Montaigne wrote to free himself from these shackles. He said, "I am human and nothing human is alien to me." In other words, everything that resides within you, no matter how confusing or uncomfortable it may seem, is a legitimate part of who you are. And do you know what the most powerful aspect of this practice is? It dissolves shame. When you begin to observe yourself with sincerity, you realize that much of your suffering comes from trying to be something idealized, following an unrealistic model of emotional, intellectual, or moral perfection. Montaigne reminds us that we are not marble statues. We are mutable, flawed, beautifully imperfect beings. And the simplicity we seek begins when we stop fighting against our own nature. But here comes a powerful key. This acceptance is not passivity. On the contrary, it is the first step toward any real transformation, because only those who see themselves clearly can change authentically. Only those who embrace their shadow can walk toward the light. However, there is another essential layer to this journey. Because even if you start to observe yourself, you will still need to deal with something inevitable: change. Nothing in you, in others, or in the world remains fixed. And as long as we do not understand this truth and do not learn to live with it, we will continue to suffer. This is what we'll explore next.